Before we can begin solving inequalities, we need to have some basic background. One, we want to be able to graph them, and the other thing is we need to be able to create interval notation, and we also want to be able to understand all of these things that I just said. So graphing inequalities, very straightforward. Whenever you're solving an inequality, we're going to have a goal of always putting our variable on the left-hand side of the inequality, and then our less than or greater than symbol is going to tell us where we're going to go from there. So if it says x is less than 3, everything below 3 will work. Now, it would be a synonymous statement to say something like 3 is greater than x, but it's much harder to read as a solution. So everything we're going to focus on is going to be x is less than. We have one exception over here. Out here, we'll talk about that in a minute. So if I say x is less than 3, that means that somewhere on my number line there's going to be a value of 3, which is going to put 2 to my left and 4 to my right. And if it says x is less than 3, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, everything who's less than 3 is going to work. Let's go ahead and use a shading color. So we can go here and we can say, okay, all of those things work. And notice that my arrow is going the same way as my less than symbol. So everything less than 3. The piece that's going to be a little bit tricky is what symbol goes at the 3, because 3 technically does not work. And so some textbooks you might see an open circle that's put right there. We're not going to use the open circle for our book, but you might see that used in other places. We're going to use parentheses and brackets. So I'm going to use a parenthesis at the 3 to signify that I've got to be less than 3 but not including 3. So this would be, I'm probably not going to have all these colors at home to do, but we'd say something like that and put a parenthesis here to signify everything less than 3. On the greater than side, we're going to have the same thing. So somewhere on my number line there's going to be a -1. To its left is going to be -2, 0, 1, -3, so on down the line. And we're going to focus on the fact that this time I want to be greater than or equal to. So when I go to color, I'm going to start here and I'm going to go this way. And again, noticing that my arrow is telling me, as long as my x variable is on the left, my arrow is telling me where I'm going. This time I've got something different though. I've got the equals sign, so greater than or equals to, which means that the -1 will work. So how we signify that is with a bracket. So a less than symbol is going to give me this parenthesis, and if I had a less than or equal to, I would have ended up with a bracket. So we have the bracket. Other books you might see as this is a closed circle, and you might see this as an open circle if you're looking at other resources. Okay. This one here is a little bit different because what we've established is, I don't know if I left myself enough room here, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, just enough room. We're saying that I'm between a -1 and 3. So the ones that work, and this is how this is read, you could think of it as being, let's cover this guy up and let's focus on this. This is saying that, well, x is greater than a -1. So that's establishing going this way. And then if I was to, I'm going to have to redo this. If I cover this up and focus on this, it's going to establish x is less than 3. So I'm going to be coloring this way. So what we've established is we have a region that's in between here. This is a between, meaning that both of these conditions are met simultaneously. And what I'm going to end up with here is something that's going to be greater than 1 but not equal to, giving me a parenthesis. And on this guy here, I'm going to get a bracket, establishing that, yes, you can be 3. So our colored region would be this guy right here, establishing that as the graph. So we also then have interval notation. Now interval notation, this is going off to example 2 here. In interval notation, I have a setup that says x is less than or equal to 1. And I will argue that it's going to be easiest for us to interpret the interval notation if I just go ahead and draw my graph. So I have a line here, and it says, well, at some point I have a 1 and I'm less than or equal to 1. So I should probably put a bracket on that because it has the equal to sign, and that will become important. So how I do interval notation is I come from the interval notation is always read from the left to the right. So coming from the left, what is the first number that is included in my set? And that's going to be a negative infinity, because this goes this direction and goes on forever and ever. So the first number colored is a negative infinity. And as I continue, where do I stop coloring? I stop at 1, and I'm going to take that bracket and I'm going to use the bracket. And you can guess coming up here on the 2, we're going to use a parenthesis. So the bracket signifies that yes, it goes to 1 and that way. On the next one, let's pick up on number 2. So at 2 it says x is greater than 2. So what we would end up with there is I would go this way and I'd say, okay, we're going to color that way. Again, interval notation, always left to right. Coming from my left, what is the first number that's green? 2. And what kind of, I blew it on the bracket. Nobody stopped me. Okay, this should have been a parenthesis, because there's no inclusion. So this established that this was a parenthesis, and this established that that was a bracket. So with my parenthesis, as I'm writing my interval notation, this is from 2. It's where I start coloring, if you will, and I stop coloring when? I don't ever stop. I keep going off and off to infinity.